All right, we're in lesson 9, dealing this series here called Big Lessons on Life, Learning to Trust God on the book of Job. That's what we've been dealing with here. This is from, what the points were from the past lessons that you should have got key points from. Hopefully you might have picked up on some of these as we've gone through this. So today, hopefully we're going to cover about chapters 32 through 37. So we'll see how this works. Supposed to be highlight. I'm not going into, I say I don't plan to go in detail verse by verse. That's not my plan at all. But I'll always give you the highlight of what this is about. So let me ask you this before we go further. What have we been talking about? What we have covered in the book of Job so far? Anybody remember?
Wisdom comes from God.
That's a statement you can pull out on any Sunday school lesson. Yeah, I know that. So for this lesson, for this series, what have we been covering? Who's been involved? Who's been? Okay, Job. Okay, that's good. Job is good. And his friends. Friends that you'd love to have around, wouldn't you? These three friends, just encouragement to you, one way or the other, to him. We know what happened to Job, to his family and all that, his possessions, and even his health has been touched as well. That's also very much important. His health has been touched for him. And then his friends show up, of course, friends. We can use the term however you like, but they are friends that come and to give their advice as to why he's dealing with what he's dealing with. And we're going to talk about that here in a moment as well. So we covered that. So we're going to talk about another person who shows up on the scene. He's supposed to be younger. We'll talk about him in a second. He comes and he has his advice he wants to give, and we'll talk about that in a moment. So as you see here, here's the cycles in the book of Job. And this, we're going to zoom in on one part of this here. But there's been main 3 cycles that go through these speeches here. Now, at the very beginning was, the first part of the first chapter or so talks about the event in heaven that took place. Things that Job doesn't know about that took place between the Lord and Satan, and the challenges here, and Satan's challenge to touch Job in his life. But we know about those, but Job doesn't know anything about that. His friends don't know anything about what took place behind the curtain, I guess you want to say, in heaven. But in the meantime, these 3 friends show up after all this stuff has happened to Job, his devastation, taking of his children away from him, taking away from his possessions away from him, taking his health in a terrible situation for him. I always think about it in a term, if you remember all these things as a circle, I guess, a circle around Job. If Job is in the middle, what was the first thing that was taken away from him? The farthest thing away from him, what was taken away? Think of it as a circle, the 3 things that were taken away from him. His what? You're talking about Job. If I was Job standing here, what's the furthest thing away from me? His what? His cattle, his sheep, his possessions. Those things are taken away. All that possessions are taken. What was the next thing taken away from him? His family, his children. That gets a little bit closer, doesn't it? You can lose your home, your valuables, and all that. But when you start losing your family, it gets a little bit closer, more personal here, isn't it? And his children were taken away. But what was the last thing that Satan was allowed to do? Touch him. Touch his health. You've lost all these possessions. You've lost your children. You're going through emotional things that you're dealing with, loss of your children. But now you're having to deal with this physical attack on your body is happening. So after that takes place, his 3 friends show up. And of course, these 3 cycles that you see here, I'm going to turn to the thing here to show the 3 and how this pointer works out. We'll see how it works. But Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar, that's cycle number 1. They do their little speech. Job responds to them. That's back and forth what goes on. And you see this taking place in these cycles. Then it happens all over again. You see in cycle number 2, Eliphaz does his speech. Bildad, of course, Job responds. Bildad speaks. Zophar speaks. And the responses as well. The next cycle is Eliphaz, his 3rd speech, Job's response. Bildad's 3rd speech, and Zophar doesn't say anything this time around. Now, these guys' illustrations, these are just illustrations. Nobody has any idea what these characters look like. It's just an illustration, of course, for this whole purpose here. So these cycles were going on with these friends. They spoke, their viewpoint, Job's response, back and forth. Okay, going on. So now we're going to talk about We'll get into this one here, Elihu. This guy Elihu, he's the youngest of all these guys, and he's going to be the one speaking, but he's going to give the longest of all things that are said. He's going to say a lot more here. And we'll talk about that in a second here. So this is how this cycle goes through the book. As your lessons, as you saw, and I tried to lay this out earlier for you, the lessons was really dealing with whatever Eliphaz said. It wasn't laid out like this, but we just said, okay, Eliphaz, all three of your speeches, then Job's responses. The next one was Bildad, all 3 of your speeches, what you said. Zophar, your 2 speeches, and how Job responded. So today we're going to talk about Elihu and his speech. Of course, Job does not respond to this at all. Okay. So here's a little zoom in on part of that down at the bottom section. You see, Job's final speech was in chapters 27 through 31, but now we're going to pick up on chapter 32 through 37, and you're going to hear these 4 speeches by Elihu and what he has to say, his viewpoint, his opinion, as he calls it, his opinion. He does say his opinion that he's going to say here. And of course, chapters 38 through 42 is from the Lord, what the Lord has to say about everything here. So what is the whole thing about the book of Job? What's the key thing about the book of Job? Anybody know? If somebody would say, oh, I studied the book of Job, what's it about?
It's about still being faithful to God even though you go through trials.
I'm sorry?
About still being faithful to God. Job was always faithful to God even though he went through, he lost everything, and everybody else said,
Good.
give up on God, curse him to die.
Right.
He said, no, my God gave me this, and he took it.
And he was still being faithful to the Lord. Of all the things that happened to him, still being faithful. I mean, his close companion, his wife, told him what? Curse God and die. Just get this over with. She's also mourning in a way because her children, her possessions are taken. The possessions, everything, their livelihood is taken. Her children are taken away. Her husband's in pain. So why don't you just curse God and just die? Get over this. Get over this. Let's be done with this. But he was still sticking to it. I still trust the Lord. No matter what, I'm still trusting him. Now, did Job along the way have questions about this whole thing? Yes, he did, as any human being would have questions about this. But he still was focusing on the Lord in his hand. And he saw himself as, I didn't do anything wrong. I don't know of anything that I've done wrong, But his 3 friends are seeing, you've done wrong, you've done wrong, you've done wrong. That's why you're in this position. You've done wrong, no matter what. But Elihu comes along on this scene. This younger guy is going to do his little speech and his opinion about everything that took place and what's going on. So when you say the book of Job, the key thing is you hear about suffering, don't we? Why do bad things happen to good people? Because Job's a good man, isn't he? How do we know he's a good man? How do we know that? Because the Lord said so in chapter 1. There's no other person out there like him on the earth. Upright, godly man, right there, Job. A godly man, isn't he? So, who else needs a stamp of approval from the Lord? He puts a stamp of approval on this guy, Job. This is the man who's outstanding. There's nobody on the earth like him that stands out. And isn't it key that it's this guy who has this stamp of approval from the Lord is the one who's being challenged all through this, is the one who's suffering and dealing with all this. It's not like a little scumbag to the side, Christian to the side, you mess up all the time, you deserve everything happens to you. You're just going wrong all the time. One more thing doesn't make you different. But here you got a godly man who stands for what's right and serving the Lord. And he is the one who's suffering through all of this. So we always have the sense, well, why do bad things happen to good people? Is it ever answered in the book of Job? No, it's never answered in the book. But that's our mindset of thinking, why is this happening? Okay? So let's look here at the chapters we're going to talk about here from this here. His 3 friends. I pull out his 3 friends. I'm going to talk about his 3 friends first, and we'll talk about Elihu later after we go through the 3 speeches here. Let me pull this. I'm dropping papers. So you see his 3 friends here. Job's friends. Pull my note over here. Eliphaz is a symbol of human experience or history. That's his viewpoint. And he's calm, he's dignified, he's temperate. He was the eldest. He stands reading, the oldest guy, probably more calm. Okay, I've been through things. I know what it's like, I know how I experience things. But if you look in chapter 4, we'll go back to chapter 4. We'll be back and forth a little bit. But in chapter 4, if you see in chapter 4, verses 12, he talks about an experience that he had. He pulls this up. Chapter 4, verse 12 through 16, he said, Now a thing was secretly brought to me, and my ear received a little thereof. In thoughts from the visions of the night, when deep sleep falleth on men, fear came upon me, and trembling which made all my bones to shake. Then a spirit passed before my face. The hair of my flesh stood up. It stood still, but I could not discern the form thereof. An image was before mine eyes. There was silence, and I heard a voice saying, shall mortal man be more just than God, and a man be more pure than his maker? And he goes on from there. So what did Eliphaz experience? He experienced something that he saw, be it a ghost or whatever. He said, something passed by me, and my skin started standing on, my hair just standing on end. Just the chill bumps came to me. From the Spirit, as it says here, from the note, he was supposed to have experienced a message regarding the justice of God. Supposing the Spirit says something about the justice of God. Okay, so he's relying on that and portraying that to Job and to the friends there. Bildad is another character here. He says he's a symbol of tradition and philosophy. More heated, direct, and personal in his attacks on Job. He's a religious dogmatist whose dogmatism rested upon tradition. This is the way it is. It's always been this way. This is the tradition. We go through the traditions. With proverbial wisdom and pious phrases which abound through his discourses, he sought to illustrate the contention that Job was suffering because of his sin. It's all because of your sin, Job. Tradition just says you sin, this is what happens to you. That's why you're being judged. The next one is Zophar. Zophar is a symbol of human merit and moral law. Speaking in daring, hasty, and impulsive mood, a religious dogmatist, but dogmatism rested upon what he thought he knew. In effect, Zophar advocated good living, for if Job turned from his sin and sincerely repented, God would pardon and restore him. I didn't go, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't show you. Thus, with forcible language, he declared that suffering is judgment, and warned the sinner to repent and thereby escape heavier punishment. This judgment is needed for you to help you. This is what is needed. But you should have done right anyways. You've been sinned. And all three of these characters point out, you're a sinner. You deserve all this. And if you would just repent, it all worked out right. So that's their viewpoint. So that's just three friends that you may or may not caught on to the lessons that have been going on. But that's some of the key things about these three friends. We'll talk about Elihu later on. So now let's get into this part about this comparison about Job in the book of Ecclesiastes. Do y'all remember studying the book of Ecclesiastes? I know it's been over 24 hours. I know it's been, some of us got the memory of a goldfish. What is that? 3 seconds? Yeah. But the book of Ecclesiastes, we covered that. Remember in the book of Ecclesiastes, the key phrase in there is what? Remember? What is it? Vanity, but there's also a phrase, under the sun. Everything's done under the sun. The preacher said it's done under the sun, which was Solomon who wrote this book, Ecclesiastes. So there's a similarity to this. In the book of Job, the struggle for perspective dominates. I've jumped over to my other slide. Like Job, Ecclesiastes is the book of struggle. Its writer, preacher tells how he sought in vain to make sense of life experience. When you read the book of Ecclesiastes, the preacher in there, which is Solomon, starts vanity. Everything's. I don't understand. Trying to understand life. I got all these possessions. I'm trying to understand life, and why is it like this? The wisdom of that. Judging from a purely human viewpoint, he didn't perceive life as either fair or fulfilling. His struggle ended, however, when he received revelation from God in the book of Ecclesiastes. So keep that in mind, the book of Ecclesiastes, everything's done under the sun, which meant what? I know I'm asking questions. You've got to deal with my questions this morning. Under the sun meant what? What is it? On earth. Under the sun. My perspective of life is what I see here, not in view of God being in my perspective here. Under the sun. Everything that the Ecclesiastes was viewed at that point. Okay? In the book of Job, and I meant to go to the next slide here. In the book of Job, the struggle for perspective dominates the conversation between Job and his three friends. His three friends are saying what? Job, you are a sinner. That's why you're dealing with this. That's why it's coming upon you. You deserve it and all that. That's the way they view it. They view it from that viewpoint. Job focused on his own character and his bewildering adversities. Job groped as one trying to make sense of life with perspective under the sun, just looking at how things are under the sun. Finally, as a forerunner to the voice of God, a young observer named Elihu spoke. In his 4 powerful speeches, he helped Job and his 3 friends see over the sun, to glimpse truth concerning God. Now, we'll talk about this in a second, come to that point about the things that these guys said. Let me ask you this. If you've read through the book of Job and you've read these guys, what they have they said some things that are truthful? Some of y'all afraid of which way to shake your head up or down. I don't know which way to answer this question. Yes, they have said things that are truthful, but they have said things that are wrong about Job as well. So keep that in mind as well. Elihu comes along and he say things that are truthful. The heads are slowly making a move. Okay, everybody say, okay, we got some nodding in the direction. Yes, he does say things that are truthful as we go through the book when Elihu does his speeches as well. Okay? So Elihu's first speech, God is not silent. God is not silent. So if you're there, go back to Job chapter 32. So these 3 men ceased to answer Job because he was righteous in his own eyes. They tried to convince Job. They tried to say, Job, you're a sinner. Da, da, da. And Job says, I haven't done anything wrong. I don't know of anything I've done wrong. I've tried to do everything right. But he says, he's not saying I'm sinless. He's not saying I'm without sin. He said, but I'm trying to do what's right. I'm just summarizing that way for you. Then was kindled the wrath of Elihu, the son of Brachel, the Bezite, of the kindred of Ram. Against Job was his wrath kindled because he justified himself rather than God. Also against his 3 friends was his wrath kindled because they had found no answer and yet had condemned Job. That's a true statement. They had found no answer and they had condemned Job. So Elihu is upset with them too. You haven't come up with an answer and you're still condemning Job. Not that Elihu is going to be not condemning Job. He will be doing so as well. Now Elihu had waited until Job had spoken because they were elder than he. When Elihu saw, chapter 32 and verse 5, and when Elihu saw that there was no answer in the mouth of these 3 men, then his wrath was kindled. And Elihu, the son of Brachel, the Buzite, answered and said, I am young, and you are very old. Wherefore I was afraid and durst not shew you my opinion. And he's going to talk about my opinion. He talks about it later on. I'm giving you my opinion. I said, days should speak, and multitude of years should teach wisdom. But there is spirit in man, and the inspiration of the Almighty giveth them understanding. Great men are not always wise, neither do the aged understand judgment. Therefore I said, hearken to me. I also will shew my opinion. Did he not make a good statement here? Just because you're old, and just because what do you say here? Great men are not always wise, neither do the aged understand judgment. Unfortunately, we see that today. We see people who are older, and it's like, what happened to your common sense? Just plain old common sense on some things. But he's pointing that out to them. So if you see here, Elihu's speeches show that his viewpoint different from that Eliphaz, and you saw that bullet here. Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar. Regardless of what Job said, these 3 contended that suffering is directly attributable to personal sin. Elihu believed that God sometimes used suffering as a preventive measure or as a refining process to perceive suffering as man's teacher. You're going through this to help you be a better person, Job. That's why you're going through all of this. Okay. God is not silent. Continuing on with that, he says here, and you'll see here, we'll go to this verse here in chapter 3. But Job wondered why God didn't answer him. Elihu addressed this bewilderment by saying that God does speak to people to warn them. In chapter 33, if you look down at verse 13. I know I'm jumping across a lot of chapter here for you. Why doest thou strive against him? For he giveth not account of any of his matters. You're talking about God. Let me back it up for you. Behold, let's look at verse 12. Behold, in this thou art not just. I will answer thee, that God is greater than man. Why doest thou strive against him? On chapter 33, verse 13. For he giveth not account of any of his matters. For God speaketh once, yea, twice, yet man perceiveth it not. In a dream and a vision of the night, when deep sleep falleth upon men, and slumberings upon the bed. Then he openeth the ears of men, and sealeth their instruction, that he may withdraw from man from his purpose, and and hide pride from man. He keepeth back his soul from the pit, and his life shall from perishing by the sword. Okay, one way he speaks to him is by dreams. Did he not? To the Old Testament, he spoke to them by dreams. The prophets, of course, he spoke to them by dreams. The next one he talks about, he's through pain. Elihu says it's also pointed that God speaks through pain. Verses 19, you see down there. He is chastened also with pain upon his bed, and the multitude of his bones with strong pain, so that his life abhorreth bread, and his soul dainty meat. His flesh is consumed away, that he cannot be seen, and his bones that were not seen stick out. Yea, his soul draweth near unto the grave, and his life is to the destroyers. Elihu's trying to point out that God uses pain also to help people. He afflicts people to make them aware of their serious problem, to get their attention, doesn't he? Does that happen in people's lives? When so tragedy happens in people's lives, what do some people do?
They can either go both ways. They can either go against God or some are drawn to God.
That's right.
The Psalms, David says through affliction, he was, he was afflicted, so he was drawn.
Affliction helps us. It can affect our lives. And this is what happens to, you probably know people that say, no, I don't believe in God and all that, and then tragedy hits their life and their family or something. It's like they start doing what? They either curse God or they say, where are you, God? Are you out there? When they have no relationship to him at all. Even for Christians who have problems. So God is not silent. Elihu's trying to point that out. God is not silent. The next one is part of his speech. Second speech is God is just. God is just. No matter what, God is just in everything. Elihu started with a summary of what Job said in his speeches, chapter 34, verses 5 through 6. Now keep in mind, even with each one of these friends, and even Elihu as far as that goes, they all kind of hear Job, but they don't hear Job. You know what I'm saying? They hear, but they're not listening to what he's actually saying sometimes. And they kind of construe it a different way. So that does happen. Husband and wives, y'all don't have that problem, right? I mean, there's, my wife says, you're not listening to me. I am listening, but you're not listening to me. Okay. We all do. Don't look at I see you looking at your husband right there, Teresa. But are you listening? And that's what part of this problem is. They're not listening. They got their perception of what they think is already, and they're not listening. So even Elihu's not immune to that as well. In chapter 34, verse 5, he says, for Job saith, and that's what he says, for Job hath said, I am righteous, and God hath taken away my judgment. Shall I lie against my right? My wound is incurable without transgression. What man is like Job, who drinketh up scorning like water? But he's talking about Job. This is Job's perspective, Elihu moved from condemning Job to defending him. Now, in a sense, he wants to defend Job. Okay, I'm going to condemn you in a way, Job, but I'm going to defend you in verses, and God's just rule. Verses 11, look down there, verse 11. For the work of man shall be rendered unto him, and cause every man to find according to his ways. Yea, surely God will not do wickedly, neither will the Almighty pervert judgment. Who hath given him a charge over the earth, or who hath disposed of the whole earth? It says here, the statement that you see in the bullet there, Elihu stated that God cannot do wrong, and he pays man back according to what he deserves. You've done wrong, God says, I'm going to punish you for that. That's what Elihu's perspective was. So in that world of thinking, people do wrong, you get judged for it. Job, you done wrong, you're going to get judged for it. Job had drawn the conclusion that God seems to act as he wants to. God's in control. God is in control. No matter what happens, God is in control. The next one is, the next part of this continuation judge. And verse 12 is a summary of Elihu's position. Verse 12, let's look at verse 12. Yea, surely God will not do wickedly, neither will the Almighty pervert judgment. What God does is just. God doesn't do wrong at any point. You cannot point the finger at God. God, you did wrong. You cannot do that. Because God is just, no matter what. Furthermore, Elihu stated that no one gave God the right to rule. That right is inherent in God. God is God. He's the Lord. He's in control. It's all He's the one in charge. I mean, it's the bottom line. We can't, some of them have the perspective like, well, who gave God the right to do such and such? He is God. He's the Lord. There's nobody over him. He is the Lord. Okay? So God is just. So the next one is, God is great. Oh, God is great. There it is. Chapter 35. So we're jumping over chapter 35. In his answer to Job, Elihu called for Job to look at the expanse of the sky and consider the greatness of God. In light of God's greatness, man cannot gain any advantage with God through good deed. Nothing that we do can manipulate God. Just because you do good things, you think, well, I can influence God, and if I do these good things, God will be impressed with me and all that. Does good works get you to heaven? Doesn't get you to heaven. We trust the Lord Jesus Christ, our Savior, to get to heaven, to do what's right. Doing good things we should be doing, right? We should be doing good things in our lives, right? So we're going to look at chapter 35 here. So if you look at chapter 35, I'm going to read chapter 35, verse 1. And Elihu spake moreover and said, thinkest thou that this to be right, that thou saidest, my righteousness is more than God's? For thou saidest, what advantage will it be unto thee? And what profit shall I have if I be cleansed from my sin? I will answer thee, and thy companions with thee. Look unto the heavens, and see and behold the clouds which are higher than thou. If thou sinnest, what doest thou against him? Or if thy transgressions be multiplied, what doest thou to him? If thou be righteous, what givest thou him? Or what receiveth he of thine hand? Thy wickedness may hurt a man as thou art, and thy righteousness may profit the Son of Man. By reason of the multitude of oppressions, they make the oppressed to cry. They cry out by reason of the arm of the mighty. But none saith, where is God, my Maker, who giveth songs in the night, who teacheth more than the beasts of the earth, and maketh wiser than the fowls of heaven? There they cry, but none giveth answer, because of the pride of evil men. Surely God will not hear vanity, neither will the Almighty regard it. Although thou sayest thou shalt not see him, yet judgment is before him. Therefore trust thou in him. But now, because it is not so, he hath visited in his anger, yet he knoweth it not in great extremity. Therefore doeth Job open his mouth in vain. He multiplieth words without knowledge. Chapter 36, 36 and 37 are the last part of his speech. His last speech here is fourth and final speech here, pointed out to be significant truth that God controls everything, everything. Now we get into these two chapters here. It's really interesting about some of the things that Elihu points out about the Lord himself. And his sovereign control is beautifully wedded into love, mercy, and grace. Elihu started with a statement that God is mighty. In chapter 36, let's go to chapter 36. Elihu also proceeded and said, in verse 1, suffer me a little, and I will shew thee that I have yet to speak on God's behalf. Now he thinks, I'm speaking on God's behalf. I'm just like a prophet, and I'm speaking on God's behalf, so listen to me. I know what God's doing here, and I'm going to explain to you what God's doing and why things are happening. I will fetch my knowledge from afar and will ascribe righteousness to my Maker. For truly my word shall not be false. He that is perfect in knowledge is with thee. Behold, God is mighty, and despiseth not any. He is mighty in strength and wisdom. He preserveth not the life of the wicked, but giveth right to the poor. Where's my note there? Yeah, keep going on. He withdraweth not his eyes from the righteous, but with kings are they on the throne. Yea, he doeth establish them forever, and they are exalted. If they be bound in fetters and be holden in cords of affliction, then sheweth them their work and their transgressions that they have exceeded. Now he talks about here about God. He says, what about God? God is mighty. God is in control. No matter who you are, if you look in verse, I just read it. Verse 7, but with kings are they on the throne, yea, and he hath established them forever, and they are exalted. If they be bound in fetters, then be holden of cords of afflictions. No matter if you're a mighty person, you could be bound as well. It doesn't make any difference, but God is mightier in all things. And no matter who they are, he's mightier. In verse, Elihu, the last bullet here that you see, Elihu then spoke of God's sovereign acts towards both the wicked and the righteous, as you see here, verses 5 through 10. God uses pain, affliction to discipline the righteous and causes them to return to him. During this speech about God is sovereign, I pull this out so you can see this and think about it. Now, Chris did touch on this a little bit earlier, but the cycle about water. Okay, so look at this passage here about sovereignty. Look in chapter 36 and verse 22. Going down there, we were down there close anyway. Behold, God exalted by his power, who teacheth like him? Who hath enjoyed him his ways? Or who can say, thou hast wrought iniquity? Remember that thou magnify his work which men beheld. Every man may see it. Man may behold it afar off. Behold, God is great, and we know him not, neither can the number of his years be searched out. For he maketh small the drops of water, they pour down rain according to the vapor. Now he's talking about what? He's talking about a drop of water. The importance of a drop of water and how God takes this water is multitude of water and creates what? You see the cycle of this of water. It rains, and it does what? It evaporates, and it rains again, and all that. It goes in that cycle. Okay. So watch this as he goes through this here. In we're down chapter 36. He maketh small the drops of water. They pour down rain according to the vapor thereof, which the clouds do drop and distill upon man abundantly. And also, can any understand the spreadings of the clouds or the noise of his tabernacle? What's the noise of the tabernacle? You have any ideas? Thunder and lightning. Thunder and lightning. Because a little rain is evaporated, and all that little rain is evaporated and creates those clouds. And who makes those clouds? God makes those clouds. He creates all of that. And all this takes place. Behold, he spreadeth his light upon it, and covereth the bottom of the sea. And for by them judgeth he the people. He giveth meat in abundance. With clouds he covereth the light. He commandeth it not to shine by the cloud that cometh betwixt. The noise thereof sheweth concerning it, the cattle also concerning the vapor. Don't you see here what he's talking about? God takes the smallest things, and this whole thing about the cycle of water, very simplistic thing, I think illustrates his sovereignty of everything he does. It's a small illustration here about taking rain, evaporating it, goes through this whole cycle, creates clouds. Clouds that become very strong, very powerful. Thunderstorms and lightning and all that takes place. And then it pours down rain, and rain does what? Rain creates floods, creates devastation as well. But with those clouds also does what? It also blocks out the sun as well. But it's an amazing cycle that we see here. We've become so accustomed to, okay, it happened, it rained. I understand the mechanics of the scientific way, how the clouds bump each other, the negative and the positive, and all that kind of stuff goes on. But who created that? Who created that? The Lord created all that. He makes all that to work, that cycle to work. And I thought it was so interesting, he takes the small drops of water to do this. So continue on with his sovereignty here. In chapter 37, God's sovereignty over the weather, the earth, and the inhabitants. I'm going to read chapter 37. I think you should, if you haven't already, I think you should have already read this, of course. But at this also my heart trembleth and is moved out of his place. Hear attentively the noise of his voice. Keep in mind, Elihu's already described something about God's majesty, his sovereignty in chapter 36. Now he moves to 37. He's still talking about God's sovereignty as well. He directeth it under, hear attentively the noise of his voice and the sound that goeth out of his mouth. He directed it under the whole heaven, and his lightning unto the ends of the earth. And after it a voice roareth. He thundereth with the voice of his excellency. He will not stay them when his voice is heard. God thundereth marvelously with his voice. Great things doeth he, which we cannot comprehend. He saith to the snow, Be thou on the earth, likewise to the small rain, and to the great rain of his strength. He sealeth up the hand of every man, that all men may know his work. Then the beasts go into dens and remained in their places. What do you see in that verse there? These things that he's pointing out, Elihu is pointing out about these things about God's control over people, control over beasts, control over the earth. What do you see here, this little simple verse here? I know it's real simple. He sealeth, in verse 8, then the beasts go into dens and remain in their places. What do y'all know it to be? Hibernation. God's created that for them. These kind of things that God has created. When you hear a thunderstorm, some people don't like thunderstorms. They don't like it. They don't like the lightning. They don't like the sound. They get scared of it. Some people, hey, I think it's pretty cool myself to hear all that taking place. You know. But let's move on. Verse 10, verse 9. Out of the south cometh the whirlwind, and out of the north, cold out of the north. By the breath of God, frost is given, and the breath of the waters is straitened. Also by watering, he wearieth the thick cloud. He scattereth his bright cloud. And it turned round about by his counsels, and they that may be, whatsoever that they may do, whatsoever he commandeth them upon the face of the earth, face of the world in the earth. He causeth to come, whether for correction or for land or for mercy. Hearken unto this, O Job, and stand still and consider the wondrous works of God. He's telling him, I think part of us is that the day and age that we live in, we're so accustomed to so much. But think about in the time that they live. They don't know all the things that go on, but they're just looking at the perspective. God is in control of the weather, everything that takes place. And we should keep that in mind too. God is in control of everything. And the weather and the storms and all that took place and the cycles that they dealt with, the animals going into their hibernation, the snow that appears, God brings that, the frost that hits the ground, God's controlling. It's by God's hand. All this takes place, you know. Doest thou know when God disposed them and caused the light of his cloud to shine? Doest thou know the balancing of the clouds, the wondrous works of them which is perfect in knowledge? How the garments are warm when he quieteth the earth by the south wind? Hast thou with him spread out thy sky, which is strong and as a molten looking glass? Teach us what we shall say unto him, for he cannot order our speech by reason of darkness. Shall it be told him what I shall speak? If a man speak, surely he shall be swallowed up. We'll stop there. He's talking about a lot of things about the weather, the heat, the cold, all those kind of things that God is sovereign. It's all in God's hand for everything. I need to stop this. I got my clock on here. Oop. Give me a minute. Oop. Stop. Verse 14, we already read that, but it says, hearken unto this, O Job, stand still and consider the wondrous works of God. A couple of last things, I forgot about these, get through them. Thunderstorms, the author points out the thunderstorms, that God is sovereign, he's powerful, he's gracious, he's awesome, he's wrathful. I want to get to Elihu. Elihu, a few slides on Elihu I want to get to real quickly. He's a symbol of human mediation. He's a symbol of human mediation. He's trying to be a mediator between Job and the Lord and God, to Job and the things there. Elihu gets some things right, just as the other men do. He is correct in acknowledging that true wisdom comes only from divine revelation, chapter 32, verse 8. He is correct in acknowledging that great men and old men are not always wise. We talked about that. I mean, that's a right statement, correct? He is correct in saying that it is wrong to give flattering words to men. I kind of went over that. I didn't touch that passage there, but talk about giving titles to men. Continuation with that thought there. He understands the concept of God's chastening better than the other men. He understands that God will not put upon man more than that which is right. In Job 34, there's 34. 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 13, I have that right here. It says, 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 13, it says, there hath no temptation taken you, but such is common to man. But God is faithful, who will not suffer you to be tempted more above that ye are able, but will with the temptation also make a way to escape, that you may be able to bear it. 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 13. Some other points here I want to get to. Overall, that you see in this darker area, I was trying to figure out how to make this different, but overall, though Elihu adds nothing of significance to the debate, nothing Elihu says helps or instructs Job, because Job has said the same thing in his own previous speeches. Elihu speaks presumptuously, Regardless of whether he might have had a bit of insight that was lacking by the other three men, he was still speaking presumptuously because he was pretending to speak for God. You saw that earlier when he spoke. And he also said, I will give my opinion. Elihu is harsh and disrespectful towards Job and misjudges him in a fashion similar to the other men, though not as severely. He is also harsh to Job as well. Thoughts on about his friends here. They spoke many true things. That's what I was trying to get across. They spoke many true things that are spoken, even though they were wrong in their philosophy and their judgment of Job. Even false religions and false doctrines contain what? Contain some truth. Kind of sounds okay. It sounds okay. Sounds close. Poison is much more dangerous when it's hidden in the otherwise wholesome food and drink. That's from David Cloud's book I got from there. Just a few points to think about. So hopefully you've learned something about this Elihu and his viewpoint. And all the three friends employers, Elihu as well, their perspective of Job and how they misconstrued things in a way. And Elihu is kind of being being a spokesman for the Lord. Thinks he's a spokesman for the Lord, that he knows these things. So hopefully you learn, praise God's majesty despite circumstances. And I think that's one thing you'll see in Elihu's speeches. God is all powerful. He is not silent. He is majesty. He is right. He's just and all those things. Even though Elihu has some wrong perspective on Job's, why he was suffering, what he was suffering. Any questions about what we went over?